I just mentioned that VMs can have internal and external IP addresses. Let's explore this in the GCP console. So here I am on the Compute Engine page, and what I'm going to do is just create a VM and walk through the process of choosing your internal and external IP address. So let me click Create. I can leave the name. You have obviously a selection of regions and zones you can choose, but I want to focus on the IP addresses. So let me go down to this option, Expand Management, Security, Disk, Networking, Sole Tenancy. Let's focus on networking. And here I have the network interface. I'm going to click the pencil icon. I could choose between different networks. So if I had different networks, I could choose between them. That's not the case here. And then I have the primary internal IP and external IP. So if we look at those options, you can see that I can use an ephemeral address, either the one that's created automatically, or I could custom select one. So within the range that I have here, I could just type an IP address. I could also reserve a static internal IP address. This is great if you want to keep that IP address for a longer time. And we have similar options with the external IP address, but one of the big differences is that you can also just select none. So as I mentioned, your instances don't need to have an external IP address. So let's just leave this as ephemeral. And by the way, with the /20 here, we have a lot of space in this IP range, over 4,000 addresses. So we could definitely have that many instances. There are also limits of how many instances you can have per network. As of this recording, it's actually 15,000. So do keep that in mind. You might have a very large IP range, but that doesn't mean that you actually can create that many instances. And that's a quota. There may also be actual limitations on physical hardware that's even available within a specific region or zone. So let me go ahead and create this instance. And we're going to keep an eye on the internal and as well as the external IP address once the instance is created. And then we're also going to stop and start the instance to see if any of the IP addresses change. So here we can see the internal IP address. So that is definitely within that space that we just looked at. The external IP address obviously is within Google's range here, and we could have reserved that, but this is an ephemeral one. So let's actually test this out. I'm going to select the instance. I'm going to stop it. So it's telling me that if it doesn't complete within 90 seconds, it might be forced. So if you had any shutdown scripts in here, you want to make sure that they can actually complete within 90 seconds. So let's run through that. And remember this external IP address that we currently have here, as well as the internal IP address. So this is going to take its time now. We can also click refresh to keep an eye on this. But this will take about 90 seconds, and that's just to give your shutdown script enough time to perform any tasks to gracefully shut down this instance. So here we are. We can see the instance is stopped. The external IP address is gone. So now we're just going to start up that instance again. It's going to tell us that we're going to be billed while it's running. That's fine. And you can see that the internal IP address remained the same while this instance stopped. So that has actually stayed for the time being. And now while this instance spins up, which we can, by the way, monitor the progress over here, we should see that we should be getting a new external IP address now because that was an ephemeral address. So here we can see the instance has started back up, and we can see that the external IP address has changed. This demonstrates that every VM needs an internal IP address, but external IP addresses are optional, and by default, they're ephemeral.